When you think of a credible witness, who do you think of? Someone you know? Someone you trust? What about a person in a position of authority? In today's video, we will be exploring stories shared by police and EMTs. In the course of their jobs, most of them have seen quite a sampling of interesting and unbelievable events, and here are just some of the most terrifying and creepy that they shared online. Our first story comes to us from a former EMT slash firefighter, and is definitely hard to explain. One night while on duty, they received a call from dispatch to do a wellness check on a person that had dialed 911 but didn't respond at all to the dispatcher. They arrived at the address and the house looked normal. When they knocked on the front door, a small elderly lady answered and greeted them. They then questioned her about the 911 call, and she was pretty adamant that it wasn't from her, and since her husband had died, she lived there alone. After seeing that she was okay, they then returned to the station. Almost immediately, they received another call to the same address with the same situation. A 911 call had been placed and there was no response on the line. So again, they returned to the same address, spoke to the woman, determined that she was okay, and then left to return to the station. And once more, as if on loop, once they reached the station, they received another call from dispatch stating that a 911 call had been placed from the same address and there was no response. So once more they drove out to her house to check on her. This time, however, when they arrived at the home and knocked on the door, there was no response from the same lady that had answered the door on the last couple calls. They checked the door handle to find that it was unlocked. After opening the door and poking their head inside, they see her lying on the floor. They rushed in to begin helping her. They determined that she wasn't breathing and moved her to the ambulance. After working on her for a little bit in the ambulance, they managed to resuscitate her and bring her back into stable condition. When she came to, she was still dazed, but still claimed that she hadn't placed the call. They then determined that given the distance between the station and her house, the call would have had to have been placed almost immediately after she had fallen. Before being admitted to the hospital for observation, she would ask our EMT if he would mind bringing her a bag that had some knitting needles and some clothes from her house to the hospital. Since it was in the area that they were planning on hanging out with a friend after shift, they agreed to swing by and pick it up for her. Once their shift ended, they went to their friend's house to pick them up and then proceeded to the lady's house to retrieve the requested bag. They left their friend in the car in the driveway and quickly ran in to grab her belongings. After retrieving the things that she had requested, just as they were about to shut and lock the front door, they swear they felt a hand on their back and heard a voice say, "Thank you." When they got back into the car, they were a bit shaken, but they tried their best to put it in the back of their mind. It was about this time that the friend would ask why the husband didn't just take her things to her. They explained to the friend that the husband had died and the woman was living there all alone. The friend's face took on a puzzled look. Then the friend said, "But I saw an old guy in the window. He smiled and then waved at me." Not wanting to believe anything paranormal was happening, the EMT was sure it was a squatter in the house and called the police to search the property. After a thorough search, the police were unable to find anything that was out of the ordinary or any evidence that another person lived there. When they went to drop off the belongings to the elderly lady, his friend accompanied him up. They then told her about what had happened. After describing the old man in the window, the woman just smiled and began to tear up. "That's my Harold," she said. This one comes from a police officer who was patrolling a small town in rural Nebraska in the 90s. It was winter and the officer was patrolling a stretch of town that had several abandoned homes. One of the corner lots in particular seemed to have attracted copper thieves, and they were told to keep a watch on it. The first time that evening that the officer drove past it was around 7 p.m., and since it sat on the corner, they could get a clear look at all four sides of the home as they drove by it. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and they continued on. About 2 hours later, the patrol brought the officer back past the house, and the back door was wide open. They were positive that it was not open the first time they drove by, so they decided to check it out. As they approached, they examined the fresh snow on the ground, and there were no footprints leading to or away from the door. The officer then called into dispatch to let them know he was going to be entering the home to make sure nobody was in there and to have a county sheriff come and back them up. They then walked closer to the open door and pulled out their flashlight to shine it inside the property. The house had been gutted on the inside. The plaster walls were torn down and there were piles of debris everywhere. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor, and it hadn't been disturbed on the inside of the doorway. This caused the officer to believe that the wind had blown the door open, or perhaps it had just opened on its own. As he was about to just shut the door and secure it, that's when he heard a loud thump come from the upper floor of the house. After listening closely for the next few seconds, he then heard children laughing. So the officer immediately entered the property and yelled out, "Police department, come downstairs." Then he heard more of what sounded like children laughing and playing above him. Again, he hopped on his radio to update the dispatcher that it sounded like there were children in the property and that he would be investigating further. He then proceeded through the house cautiously, checking the main floor while trying to locate the stairwell up to the second floor. He would hear noises 2 more times as he was clearing the first floor, but since there was no response when he had yelled out, he was beginning to think it might be an animal. But the officer was almost positive that what he was hearing was children laughing. Finally, he located the stairs that led up to the upper floor. As he walked up them, it became eerily quiet. On the upper floor, there were bedrooms on either side of the stairs and a hallway leading to another bedroom at the end. Just as he paused at the top of the stairs to evaluate the surroundings, another thump came from the bedroom on the left. Carefully, he peeked inside the bedroom, and it was completely empty except for a pile of plaster and wood in the middle of the room. That's when they noticed sitting on top of the debris was a page that had been ripped out of a children's book with a picture of a police officer on it. The hair stood up on the officer's neck, and a feeling of dread swept over him. After that, he rushed downstairs and out of the home and told dispatch that there was nobody in the house. After locking the door, they then swore to themselves that they would never return to the property again. An officer was working county roads early one morning at about 3 a.m. The officer, having been on shift for a while, now needed to use the restroom, but the closest bathroom was about 30 minutes away. Since he was in the countryside, he decided it wouldn't be any harm in just finding a secluded spot to urinate. This wouldn't be hard, as flanking each side of the road was pretty dense forest. After traveling shortly down a gravel road that led off one of the main county roads, they exited their patrol car and began to relieve themselves in a ditch. While doing so, he had the distinct feeling that he was being watched. He looked over his shoulder, and past the rear bumper of his patrol car, about 20 feet off into the darkness, was a dark, shadowy figure just watching him. Surprised, he immediately stopped urinating and zipped up his zipper. He then went on to begin apologizing to what he thought might be an angry landowner, wondering who was urinating on their driveway. No reply came, however, and that's when the officer became unnerved. Immediately, the creeped-out officer went into what he called tactical mode and yelled out demands for the person to step forward and show him their hands. All the while, he was reaching for his flashlight to shine in the direction of the shadowy figure. When the flashlight came on and passed over where the figure had been standing, the figure vanished. The officer then turned and quickly scanned the nearby tree line and surrounding area. He also listened closely for any sounds that would be from someone running away in the brush, although nothing would be seen or heard. Feeling uneasy and a bit unsafe, they decided to climb back into their patrol car and leave the area. As he was climbing back into his patrol car, he took one more glimpse at the area where he had seen the figure. That's when he would spot the same figure there again, only this time it was distinctly moving right for him. He scrambled into his patrol car and sped off. While driving down the gravel road, he then checked his rearview mirror and he could still see the shadowy figure chasing his patrol car. He then wrapped up his post by saying he decided to leave because he was fairly sure that his bullets were not going to stop that spirit. And this concludes our 3rd episode. All of these professionals had run-ins with unexplainable circumstances and are still haunted by their stories to this day. Have you ever had a creepy encounter that stayed in your head for weeks or years afterwards? Share it in the comments. If you stayed till the end, then odds are that you'll like the many more episodes I have coming, so why not like and subscribe so you're among the first to see them as they become available. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.